Hello and welcome to The Sun Will Rise, Press TV's weekly show on Palestine. I'm Amina Taylor. Now, it's been the inescapable story, the claims of anti-Semitism within Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. But are the claims all they seem? The latest wave of accusations come as Mr. Corbyn faces growing pressure from amongst his own backbenchers and union bosses to adopt the full list of anti-Semitism examples as set out in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's controversial definition, which many people believe stifles criticism of Israel. But there has been some public pushback, with a senior Palestinian diplomat to the UK urging the Labour leader not to give in to the mounting pressure, as he called on Mr. Corbyn to resist changes to his party's rules. On today's show, we'll discuss what's really behind these anti-Semitic smears against Jeremy Corbyn and his party. But first, here's Mona Kandil from the West Bank exploring the Palestinian perspective on the creation of Israel, their mass displacement, and if Palestinians themselves feel it was indeed a racist endeavor.
70 years after the creation of Israel on the Palestinian land, after forcibly expelling over 750,000 Palestinians, the indigenous population, people who are still living here insist that the so-called State of Israel was only founded on discrimination towards our people on the basis of religion and origin. They believe that it's the real definition of racism.
We
cannot imagine racial colonization without remembering Zionism and racism. Zionism is an example of fascist status and racist status that is defined about race. When Israel was created, Herzl chose its name to be Israel, which means the Jewish land, the state of the Jews. This was the basic law, and all the laws later came to solidify this idea.
Israel carries out what it wants. Today, only 30% of Palestinians still live in the lands occupied in 1948. What was taken by power will only be regained by power. We ask all the people around the world to stand by us. Israel tries to establish now a Jewish state, which only includes Jews. It's racism itself, and we as Palestinians will never allow this to happen.
Criticism of Israel and its creation is in itself considered as anti-Semitic by the Israeli regime and many of its friends around the world. This month, there have been many voices in the UK attacking its Labour Party for its newly adopted definition of anti-Semitism. Observers here say those in a way or another are contributing to the silencing of oppressed Palestinians, the potential criminalization of their struggle against racist Israeli policies, and the negation of their demands for freedom and equality.
يركزون كثيرا على ذلك من أجل تجريم.
They focus on the anti-Semitism definition a lot in order to criminalize world's political leaders, and this is exactly what happened to the leader of the UK Labour Party, because he's a critic of Israel. Israel fears this man could one day be the British Prime Minister. Thus they say there will be a change in Britain's policy towards Israel. This could affect other EU states.
Moreover, the Israeli Knesset has recently passed this so-called Jewish nation-state law that guarantees the ethnic religious character of Israel as exclusively Jewish and entrenches the privileges enjoyed by Jewish citizens, while simultaneously anchoring discrimination against Palestinian citizens and legitimizing exclusion, racism, and systematic inequality. Palestinians say that it's a historical fact that their removal from their land in 1948 was a racist endeavor, and to state the fact could never be anti-Semitic, especially as since the 1948, Tel Aviv has adopted racist policies to deny Palestinians their human rights and the right to self-determination. For The Sun Will Rise, this is Mona Kandil, occupied Ramallah.
For their analysis on this developing issue, I am pleased to be joined by Professor Chaim Rashid. He was born to Polish Jewish survivors of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen concentration camps in a refugee camp in Rocca di Papa, just outside Rome. Chaim himself is an ex-Israeli who is now an anti-Zionist filmmaker and noted academic. Alongside him is the Professor Jonathan Rosenhead. He lectures at London School of Economics and is currently the chair of the British Committee for the Universities of Palestine and also vice chair of Free Speech on Israel. Professors, good to have you with me. I start with you, Haim, on this one. When Labour's National Executive Committee decided not to adopt all the IHRA's definition and examples of anti-Semitism, why was this weaponized? Why was this deemed to be problematic?
Well, Israel has never been more extreme than it is at the moment. And there is a correlation between that move to the fascist right and its aggression towards its critics. These two things are connected, of course. The more it moves to the right, the more it wants to silence its critics. And those examples are specifically about the ability to criticize Israel. So now Israel is the only country in the world we are not allowed to criticize. It doesn't exist in any other case, of course. And basically the Labour Party is under pressure, mainly by the Tories. You know, a lot of them are in the Jewish community, but not only Jews are Zionists, of course. And actually most Zionists are not Jews. So the Zionist lobby in Britain, the Tories, and some of the Blairites are doing their best to stop Corbyn from becoming Prime Minister, because he has a chance, a very fair chance of winning an election if it was held today or in a few months, which it is likely to be. So they're pulling all the stops, and they have not found a better weapon than weaponizing or basically inventing anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
Jonathan, will this hurt Corbyn electorally? Because you're hearing the repetition of this. And it's been said, if you repeat something long enough and as many times as you wish, it almost becomes fact.
Yes, the Labour Party and the ruling Conservative Party are absolutely level in the polls. The British government is the most disastrous in living memory. Labour should be 20 points ahead, and undoubtedly the smears which are being circulated one every week against Corbyn and the allegation that there is anti-Semitism throughout the Labour Party is hurting their chances. And these smears are being helped by the members of the Labour Party itself, MPs on the right who don't want Corbyn to lead their party. They would rather lose an election than have Corbyn consolidate the left-wing gains in the party.
Why is that?
Because they think their party has been taken away from them by the members. They think that the members had no right to choose people that were out of sympathy with their position. The Blairites had been in control of Labour for 20 years. They didn't think it was legitimate for the members to decide otherwise.
There is something very specific here about the definitions, you say, the examples of anti-Semitism that have been excluded. The Conservative Party adopted this wholeheartedly. There were no murmurs. The idea that Labour didn't is irksome to many.
Well, actually, this is very interesting, because in Israel itself, the IHRA has not ever been adopted. And, you know, people in Israel criticize the government much more openly than they do every day of the week in Hebrew. So this is really bizarre. This is not about anti-Semitism. There is no real anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. There might be some on the right, but not in the Labour Party. The Labour Party is not a racist party. It's an anti-racist party. It's not about anti-Semitism. It's about stopping Corbyn, as Jonathan said, from becoming the next Prime Minister of Britain.
I'd like to join in just, you said that the Conservative Party has adopted this definition. It has not. The Conservative government has adopted it, but the Conservative Party, which undoubtedly has more anti-Semites than Labour, has not even discussed adopting it for its internal disciplinary processes. Labour, which is probably the least anti-Semitic party in Britain, which is the least anti-Semitic country in Europe, is being targeted for totally disproportionate reasons. If you're concerned about racism in this country, Islamophobia is the issue. Anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is crazy.
There is something about conflating criticism of Israel with being anti-Semitic. And from Benjamin Netanyahu down to people in this country, Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, and so on, they've almost adopted that position. Why?
Because there is a lobby which we have seen recently some films about, and that lobby is very powerful both here and in the United States and in France and in other countries. And that lobby's main function is to stop debating Palestine, to stop debating what is happening between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And since 2014, when 2,500 people were killed, murdered by the Israeli forces, that lobby has done all it can to stop talking about Palestine. And actually it succeeded. In Britain, we now are not talking about Palestine, we're talking about non-existent anti-Semitism.
Professor Rosenhead.
Yes, this campaign is undoubtedly minted. The ideas come from Israel. The Israeli ambassador here is undoubtedly involved in its dissemination. Israel has been trying to deflect attention from the criticisms of it for 10, 15 years, in fact much longer, but particularly then. They tried, if you like, I'm afraid, playing the Holocaust card in a disgraceful way. They tried demonizing the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. They claimed there was a process of delegitimization going on. They tried everything and none of it really worked. And anti-Semitism is the one that has stuck. And it's stuck since this body, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, put the word Holocaust attached to the definition, because it'd been around for 15 years before that.
We heard Mona Kandil's piece there in the West Bank. Would you agree with the assessment that the creation of Israel itself is a racist endeavor?
Of course. In 1948, two apartheid states were created, one in South Africa and one in Israel. The South African one was openly an apartheid state. The Israeli state has never admitted it until this year, when it made it a law. So apartheid is now legalized. But basically, the Jewish state is a racist idea, and always has been, and now more than ever. So, of course, I agree with the Palestinians that are saying that between the river and the sea, there are 12 million people, and 6 million of them have no rights whatsoever. Where would we accept it otherwise? It would not be accepted anywhere else. And to criticize it is not anti-Semitic, it's common sense.
All right, well, now it's time to catch up with a few of the recent stories about Palestine that you probably didn't see in the mainstream media. We'll come back to this discussion in a little while. Now, the US president has cut over $200 million in funding to UN relief efforts in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip. A US State Department official said Donald Trump has ordered the money to be redirected elsewhere without specifying the details. Hanan Ashrari, a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council, has condemned the decision. She expressed that this move is an extreme and cheap form of blackmail which threatens the very livelihood of Palestinians.
Well, very clearly, the U.S. cutting of aid to Palestine is a form of cheap blackmail, and it shows a certain degree of moral and political bankruptcy. It is a way in which the U.S. is further complicit in the Israeli occupation and is further punishing the Palestinians who are under occupation and carrying out the wishes of Israel, the occupiers, who enjoy not only full immunity and impunity, but $38 billion of support that the U.S. is trying to increase even. So it is a form of political blackmail, and it is a form of implementing the Israeli plan to punish the Palestinians and to reward the occupier, Israel.
The head of the Palestinian Football Association, Jibril Rajoub, has been banned from football-related activities for a year by FIFA. This on charges of, quote, inciting hatred and violence. This comes at a sensitive time where Israel switched the venue of the June game from Haifa to Jerusalem Al-Quds. Following the controversial move, Rajoub urged Palestinians to burn shirts bearing the name of Lionel Messi if the Argentinian star went ahead and played there. The game was subsequently cancelled. FIFA has fined Rajoub 20,000 Swiss francs, or around the equivalent of $20,000. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the US Senator John McCain as a great friend and defender of Israel. McCain, a Republican and prominent critic of President Donald Trump, died on Saturday, aged 81. Critics of John McCain described him as a warmonger who over the years advocated for military intervention in a number of countries, including Bosnia, Kosovo, Georgia, North Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, and Mali.
On this occasion, I wish to extend my condolences to the family of Senator John McCain, a great American patriot, a great friend of Israel. I've known John McCain for many, many years. I visited him in the U.S. Congress many times, and he visited me in Jerusalem many, many times, including in recent years. Israel never had a greater champion and a greater defender. The state of Israel salutes Senator John McCain.
And finally, the Israeli regime forces released footage in which the military is seen demolishing a Palestinian family house by using an armored bulldozer in the village of Kober in the West Bank. The Israeli military on Tuesday decided to flatten the house, which belonged to a Palestinian youth accused by the regime of being behind a deadly stabbing attack against an Israeli settler. Many argue the move to tear down structures and building in Palestinian villages is a thought-out form of collective punishment by the regime to assert their dominance. And of course, my guests are still with me. I couldn't let us go off the topic, which we will return to, without just mentioning this 200 million cut in aid to relief services in both the West Bank and in Gaza. Professor Rosenhead.
Well, it is of a piece with his decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. This is a man who if you like, consorts with anti-Semites and fascists in America, but is a great friend of Israel, he thinks. He's not a friend of the Israeli people, in my view, because he's leading to think that they can get away with stuff which will in the end redound to Israel's discredit and its disadvantage. But he is willing to do anything to play to the gallery and to support Israel in their unfortunate and disastrous policies.
This will hurt, though, won't it? The removal of this kind of...
Of course it will hurt. Gaza is on the brink of collapse. Water, electricity...
But hasn't that been the point?
Well, exactly, yeah. Basically, it's about making life in Palestine impossible for the indigenous population. That is the function of everything that Israel and the United States is doing. And as we are speaking, in Hebrew, they already announced that they move towards basically taking over legally all the territories and annexing them. Now, with the territories, they have to annex 4.5 million Palestinians. Those 4.5 million Palestinians have no rights and will have no rights, and therefore they have to eject them. And all the measures now, over the last 10 years, and especially in the last year, are about making life impossible for everyone in Palestine, not just in Gaza. And that is the continuation of the Nakba, if you want. That is the plan.
And by even bringing this up in a British sphere, some of this conversation would not be deemed suitable if you are going by the standard IHRA definition here about what is anti-Semitism and what is not.
The IHRA definition and its examples are hopelessly vague, but they give a license for people.
Just enough room for you to get in trouble.
No, I think it gives a license to people who want to make complaints about Labour Party members who utter the sort of criticism you've heard from us about Israel, for them to be complained, and every complaint has to be investigated. Members will very likely be suspended, and everybody else in the Labour Party will feel scared. So, and therefore, discussion on Palestine will be further prevented. So it's really crucial that the Labour Party should cease backing off from these attacks, which are unscrupulous attacks, which are being made to try and protect Israel and derail the left-wing momentum of the Labour Party.
Because it's interesting, Professor Rosenhead says this, because one part of the discussion in the public sphere, I hear it on transport and phone-in shows and so on, people go, it's a non-issue. But in another sphere, this is something that's been essentially effective as a weapon to basically grind these conversations to a halt?
It's definitely been very effective in silencing the debate about Palestine, about the crimes, the war crimes of Israel. And another thing, it's been very effective in silencing debate about the changes Jeremy Corbyn wants to bring to British society. So now, instead of discussing what is happening in Britain, we are discussing, without really understanding most people, I believe, non-existent anti-Semitism in the Labour Party morning, afternoon and evening. And this is supposedly the problem of Britain. The problem is not the blacks who are sent back to the Caribbean illegally, or Muslims which are attacked in the street, or the Brexit saga that goes nowhere, or the fact that there is so much violence in London and around it, or many other social problems.
You've just rattled off half a dozen issues there, which I'm sure if you ask the man on the street, in terms of a hierarchy of problems.
Well, for example, I've been in the Labour Party since, not continuously, but since 1962. I've never met a single anti-Semitic incident. Almost everybody in the Labour Party
knows... But your critics will say you would say
almost
that.
Everybody in the Labour Party knows that this is not a crisis. It's on social media and we don't know who's doing it. What it's about is Jeremy Corbyn is the only leader or left-wing leader of any developed country with a realistic chance of power at the moment. He's a principled man. And so it matters to the world, not just to Britain, not just to Palestine or Israel, that this should be fought off and that he should be able to bring in this program of reforms and show that it can be done in a developed country.
And something else that's popped up here is the fact that whenever the term Zionism is used, there are many critics who say, well, that's a shorthand for Jewish and therefore anti-Semitic in its very nature, Professor.
Of course, this is not true. The two of us are Jews. I'm also an Israeli. We're not Zionists, and I've never been a Zionist. I'm an anti-Zionist. There are many anti-Zionist Jews who are supporting the rights of everyone between the river and the sea to live there in equality and in peace. That is not anti-Semitic. That is basically supporting democracy, supporting a peaceful resolution of the conflict. If they will continue to argue that this is anti-Semitic, it won't make it anti-Semitic.
Then why is it holding so much sway then, Jonathan?
I just wanted to say that the conflation is not between Jews and Zionists. It's the conflation the other side is trying to make between anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism. And I think that is the basic confusion. I think that in this, to answer your first question,
is it a deliberate confusion?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's absolutely deliberate. But to answer your point, I think it has resonance because of the disaster of the Holocaust, and so that to be accused of anti-Semitism is a peculiarly noxious label to stick on it. And if bodies claiming to represent the Jewish community, which they do not, they represent some strata of the Jewish community. The Jewish community is very split on this issue. But if bodies which have the formal designated title of being representative organisations accuse repeatedly Labour Party and now Jeremy Corbyn in terms of being anti-Semitic, that is a very damaging thing, which naturally people wish to say, no, it's not the case, whereas they should come back fighting and say this is an irresponsible and indeed libelous statement.
There is some suggestion here that Jeremy Corbyn isn't pushing back hard enough against this. Where do you stand?
I think he definitely isn't, and I wish he would, because
what would that look like?
Well, he should talk about what Israel is doing. He should say, this is why they are trying to shut me up. He cannot satisfy them. Only one thing will satisfy them, getting rid of him. He thinks that if he apologizes for non-existing anti-Semitism in the party, which never was proven, they would shut up. They will never shut up. The function is to get rid of him. And if he only understood that and stood up, which he did recently once only, and said, this is about shutting out debate on Palestine. I am not going to do this. There's a lot of Israelis and Jews that are with me. I'm supporting them. They are supporting what I'm doing. I have been in Britain since 1972. I've never met an anti-Semite. every other country I went to, I met anti-Semite, and in Israel, you can meet racists the minute that you get off the plane. This is the least anti-Semitic and racist country in Europe. And now we are told that anti-Semites are in the Labour Party. This is disgusting and this is untrue.
All right, we'll leave it right there, and I'm afraid because that's all the time we have. Very, very special thanks to my learned guest and, of course, for you for joining us. Please continue to follow the show on social media. We're back next week with more news and analysis on the Palestinian freedom struggle. Until then, bye-bye.